So good evening and welcome to the fourth talk in our Centenary lecture series. My name's Kieran and I'm from Lisburn Museum. So tonight's speaker is Professor Steve Royle, Emeritus Professor of Island Geography from Queen's University, Belfast. He's a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society and a member of the Royal Irish Academy. To date, Professor Royle has had a distinguished career and published widely on a range of topics, but notably on islands, authoring books on the settlement of St. Helena under the East India Company and the Hudson Bay Company on Vancouver Island. In addition to this, he has written extensively on Belfast and its history, and is the author of the Irish Historic Towns Atlas series, as well as this fantastic and very readable book on Belfast, Portrait of an Industrial City. So it's my real pleasure tonight to welcome tonight's speaker, Professor Steve Royle.
Okay, so I'm talking on to the title of The Clanging of Metal to the Clinking of Coin. Very nicely alliterative. And it's based around the history of industry in Ulster over the last 120 years or so. Start off, of course, with the Titanic and the Olympic. And Titanic comes into the story, but the story is not all about the Titanic. There's more to the history of industry in Ulster than the Titanic, important though that was. Indeed, we start off with a statement by L.R. Crescent about Ulster towns. And he says, it's not dated, but it really relates to the pre-famine, early pre-industrial period. Except for the very great, the local tailor was considered sufficient. That's the thing to be borne in mind about all these little towns of that time, that in most ways they were self-supporting and self-contained in all the commoner avocations. The more skilled trades were usually supplied by travelling salesmen. Each town had its tannery, a brewery, made its own boots, come back to boots later on, spun its own wool, wove its own cloth, and made its own clothes. Now this is something we can call localism, that the towns provided for themselves, with travelling salesmen, peddlers bringing in perhaps more skilled trades. It was a time when people were reasonably self-sufficient, and certainly self-sufficient within the town, with relatively little coming from outside and them going relatively few places. This, of course, was all to change. And even in the pre-famine period, there was change afoot, particularly in Belfast. Belfast, of course, stars in my story of industrialisation in Ulster over a century and a bit. This is taken from the Irish Historical Towns Atlas, which Kieran mentioned I did the Belfast fascicles for. 1807, taken from trade directories. And I've divided what the people did. Those are what the people did. There were 24 boot and shoemakers in Belfast, 2 machine makers, 1 person making vinegar and mead, 1 whitesmith, and so on. Black, probably, not definitely, but probably local or regional. And red, the export trade. Red is not trades in red. Ships, 2 ship makers in Belfast in 1807. These aren't making for the local market. These are making for people outside. So even in 1807, Belfast has some reasonable amount of outside trade, rope making, sail and twine, cotton machines, cotton cards, which are part of the cotton machine, block and pump makers, anchor smiths. And these go along with the local production, brewers, distillers, joiners, tailors, smiths, upholsterers. Then, round about that time, a couple of processes joined together and changed things. Or just on the right there, interred here in Belfast City Cemetery, John Ritchie, one of these early ship makers. First change, I've labelled it, was localism declines. This making for the local area, people buying things made in the local area, that declines. There was a very nice statement made by Philip Waller a good few years ago now in a book called Town, City and Nation. He says, the local provision of services, including manufacturers, was encroached upon in the second half of the 19th century. Especially, here's a good bit, especially significant was the way in which a traditional country town became little more than the agent for city or big firm interests. Long-standing local interests collapsed in the face of competition from major capitalist concerns. So it wasn't the local people making things for local people, it was people in specialist centres making things for everybody. And Irish towns that were to succeed regarding manufacturing industry in this more competitive world would have to cater for more than a local market. And the prime example was Belfast, with its development of export indices throughout the 19th century. So that's number one, change number one, the decline of localism. Change number two, and not unrelated to change number one, workshops to factories, industrialisation. And here's a rather sad example of the sawyers, the people who cut wood by, I'll say by hand, they obviously used very large saws, but just using human power, sawyers of Belfast, who were affected by industrialisation, so much so that the secretary of the Sawyers Association wrote to the Prime Minister. The memorialists, that's those who are writing, trace all their sufferings to the following causes, which, unproductive of any advantage to the public at large, have almost entirely deprived them, the sawyers, of the means of earning their daily bread, namely the daily increasing numbers of sawmills, whereby manual labour is almost totally superseded by machinery, and the importation from America of large quantities of planks, so a very low rate of duty, just sold here for joists and rafters and various other purposes. And in the letter, they go on to say that a pair of sawyers, that's the top dog, a person on top of the pit, and the bottom dog, a person underneath who's getting all the cuts, all the sawdust dropped down on him. It's probably certainly a him. A pair of sawyers can cut 300 superficial feet of timber in a good day's work in 12 hours. Goodness, 12 hours sawing. A sawmill requiring just 6 operatives can cut 30,000 feet of timber in these 12 hours. Doing the work of thus 100 pairs of sawyers, 194 sawyers thrown out of work, with assuming a family of 582 individuals destitute. Please, Prime Minister, do something about it. And of course, the Prime Minister couldn't. And in Belfast, in the 1840s to 1890s, there were something like 57 sawmills happening, and thousands, presumably, of hand sawyers thrown out of work because of industrialisation. So that changes things. That's associated with a decline of localism, as I said. Here's a second example taken from a very nice book many of you may well have read, Alexander Irving's My Lady of Chimney Corner, which is about Antrim, and it's set, this bit of it is set in the 1840s before the famine. The father, there here's a picture of the father taken from the book, or my copy of the book anyway. He's a bookmaker, operates his business, as was very common in those days. People operated their businesses, they made their trades, their goods from their house. Not so many factories then, it changed of course. Operated his business from the house in Antrim. Then the news came, news of a revolution. This is now a quote from the book. They're making boots by machinery now, Anna said one day. It's doting you are, Anna, Jamie replied. She read the account. How could a machine make a boot, Anna? He asked in bewilderment. But machines could make boots. Then makers became menders. Shoemakers became cobblers. There was something of magic and romance in the news that a machine could turn out as much work as 25 men. But when my brothers, that's Alexander Irving's character's brothers, moved away to other parts of the world to find work, because there's no work in Antrim making shoes by hand anymore, the romance was rubbed off, the need of skill vanished, and the power of capital advanced. So decline of localism, industrialisation, development of the factory system changes this small towns of Ulster changes also in a different way. Belfast and of course Londonderry, Derry in the northwest, where they made shirts. And there's impact on the small towns across Ireland. Here's a nice example from our Irish Historic Towns Atlas of Bandon in Cork. Population in Bandon, 1821, over 10,000. 80 years later, 1901, under 3,000. In the late 18th century, textile manufacturing, though highly commercialised, was still mainly done by self-employed workers in ordinary dwelling houses. Bandon produced a lot of cloth by people sitting in their front rooms doing the weaving. Industrialisation, which comes after 1800, mostly large labour-intensive plants accommodated in specially designed buildings, many involved in finishing cloths from home-based woolcombers, dyers, spinners and weavers. So there's still some home-based working, but the finishing is done in now factories. In the 19th century, local, also regional production, such as Bandon's textile trade, suffered from competition from larger scale, more cost-effective manufacturing. Of course, that's the thing, it's cost-effective to manufacture in big plants, economies of scale, cost-effective manufacturing as industrial centres developed. And after 1850, shrinkage in Bandon's manufacturing was, the study says in the Irish Historic Towns Atlas, due to competition from larger production centres, including Lancashire and Yorkshire. So here's another thing, we're now moving away. It's not just production within Ireland, which is competing with Ireland's towns, it's production from Britain across the water. Belfast, 1840s now, same directory, inquiry, same red for the export industries, black for probably local industries, and things are accelerating. Aerated water, Cantrell and Cochrane's was a Belfast company. 8 of those. Chemicals, guns, linen thread, machines, muslin, rope and twine, ships. Now 3 ship-making companies, shuttles and reeds, brass founders, cotton spinners, flax spinners, iron founders, along as with the local production, the bakers, 32 bakers. Somebody made umbrellas, somebody made clocks and watches, probably for local, but in addition to Belfast's local trade, we have the export trade. And the picture of Belfast there, taken just a little bit later from 1860, you can see, particularly in the distance, a number of smoky factory chimneys, and that's what is happening in Belfast at that time. We're changing, industry's changing. And Belfast, which becomes a really classic example of a Victorian industrial city, had, as you're well aware, I'm sure, 2 engines of growth. First made here, I'm talking about is Linenopolis. Belfast becomes the centre of linen production. Linen took over from cotton from the late 1820s. There was a big cotton factory which burnt down, Holland's, and he replaces it by a linen factory, and other people see this is a success and join in. Cotton is not entirely replaced, but largely replaced by linen companies in the 19th century. And the growth is phenomenal. In 1862, there's under 500,000 flax spindles. In 1868, just 6 years later, 724,000. For the same dates, 3,000 power looms, that's looms produced, being powered by steam, 3,000 to 9,000. And you can see the map there of linen production facilities in Belfast in the 19th century. And you can see it's largely in the west of the city, on the Antrim side, focused in established textile areas, originally along streams, sometimes were used for water power, with the warehouse area, the selling area in the centre of the city. Along with linen comes all sorts of problems, as you're aware, occupational health, especially lung disease. And interestingly, linen supplied jobs for women. Belfast households usually had both the man and the woman working, which made Belfast's working class actually relatively wealthy, more so than in some other cities across the water. And it gave Belfast and its women, the Millies, a distinctive character. And here's what George Benn, who wrote on industry in the 19th century in Northern Ireland, well, what becomes Northern Ireland. In one factory alone, my worthy friend Dr. Mulholland has 500 handsome girls. Would have to be handsome. You couldn't say 500 handsome girls today, but anyway, he did. Who work in huge long chambers lighted by numbers of windows, hot with steam, buzzing and humming. And I do like this reference to noise. My talk is clanging and clinking, it's noise. Here's noise, buzzing and humming, with thousands of whirling wheels that all take motion from a steam engine, which lives apart in a cast iron temple of its own, from which it communicates with the innumerable machines that the 500 girls preside over. They have seemingly but to take away the work when done. The enormous monster in his cast iron room does it all. He cards the flax, he combs it, he spins it, he beats it, he twists it. The 500 girls stand by to feed him or take the material away from him when he's had his will of it. There's something frightful in the vastness as in the minuteness of his power. There's a lovely description of work in a steam-powered linen mill, of which, as we just saw, there were lots in Belfast and others elsewhere, of course, including Lisburn, where we're focused tonight. The second engine of growth for Belfast, of course, was shipbuilding. Belfast isn't a place which you'd expect shipbuilding to become important. It doesn't have any coal, it doesn't have any iron production. What it does have is flat, easily worked reclaimed land at the top of the lagan there. By sheltered water, Belfast Lock makes it sheltered, so you can build your ships, you can launch them in its sheltered water. There's a long tradition of wooden shipbuilding, which helps the development of iron shipbuilding. People have been building ships in Belfast since at least the 17th century. And then we have the personal factors. Harland, with his ambition and his drive. There's a statue of Harland from Belfast City Hall grounds. A Wolfe, who said by himself, did I just smoke the cigars for the firm? But no, he had a lot of contacts, relatives. The White Star Line was his relatives. And workmen of Workman and Clark, the Wee Yard, which may have been a wee yard compared to Harland and Wolfe, it was still the largest production of ships in one of the years at the turn of the century. Workman was an employee of Harland and Wolfe, but decided to set up on his own with Clark. And Harland and Wolfe expanded from 3 acres to 135 acres, a huge area. And they did everything. Shipbuilders then were self-contained. Engine works, upholstery works, everything. And Harland and Wolfe built mainly passenger ships. Workman Clark built mainly cargo ships. And you get some idea of the scale. The area there, Queen's Island in 1902, and there's the boiler works of Workman Clark also in 1902. Look at the size of that and the huge heaviness of those machine parts there. So shipbuilding and linen, Belfast becomes the classic industrial city, and its population rockets. Population growth in Ireland in the second half of the 19th century is unusual. Most places, of course, just lose population. Dublin doesn't, Belfast doesn't, County Antrim doesn't, where Belfast's population is counted. Look at 1841, before the famine, 70,000. After the famine, 1851, gone up a bit, but then goes up quite rapidly. And by 1901, Belfast has 350,000 almost. But getting on for 5 times the size of its population just 60 years earlier. And the city grows. You can see the built-up area in 1858 in the dark colour, the built-up area in 1901 in the dots, and the boundary is the original boundary pre-1853, 1853 extension, the 1901 extension. Railways come in and it becomes A lot of land is reclaimed here for industry, and it becomes the classic industrial city, and that has an effect on other settlements in the north of Ireland. And the Ulster towns decline, absolutely, in many cases, relatively, in all cases, with exception perhaps of Derry up in the northwest. The Parliamentary Gazetteer, published in the 1840s, a huge 10-volume survey of Ireland, a magnificent piece of work. Ballymena, though not more favourably situated than many other towns and villages in the county Antrim, very considerably less so than some, is excelled only by Belfast, yet excelled by it at enormous disproportion in both trade and population. So there's Belfast trade hitting Ballymena's trade. Larne, the import and export trade. Larne, of course, is a port, was at one time of note and promised to become of large importance, but has for generations past been almost completely destroyed by the enterprising rivalry and more advantageous situation of Belfast, again from the Parliamentary Gazetteer. And the Ulster towns generally, which is Crescent's work again, better communications and the manufacturers of the large towns have sucked the lifeblood out of all the little places. So localism's gone now. There might still be a few bakers left, but you didn't buy your clothes anymore made by a local tailor. You bought your clothes made by somebody in a specialist place, and shops were set up, bring in the clothes in, sell the clothes. Development of retailing is something else which takes place during this century. Lisburn does a bit better. In 1837, taken from Samuel Lewis's Dictionary of Ireland. In 1837, Lisburn has vitriol works, chemical works, a damask factory owned by the Coulson family, the Richardsons, who own a big linen factory just outside, Barber's thread factory at Hildon, the spinning mills, there's bleach greens. And Lisburn is a nice example of the way in which power begins to change. It's a struggle over power, political power, the control of the people. And there's a contest, especially in Lisburn, but in other places too. It's nicely played out in Lisburn, between the industrialists, the mill owners, and the landowners, Lord Hertford, for political control. Political control means getting a place in Parliament, in the United Parliament of Great Britain and Ireland, as it was in the 19th century. And we see this very nicely in the 1863 by-elections in Lisburn. There's two elections in 1863, and these are struggles, very brutal struggles. That's why we know so much about them, because of the brutality of what's gone on, led to inquiries taking place and lots of information being collected. Lisbon's MP had been of the mill owning family, the Richardsons. Jonathan Joseph Richardson, resigned through ill health. It was thought that his, of course, Jonathan, I was very confused with a Jonathan Richardson and a Jonathan Joseph Richardson, they're cousins. Jonathan Richardson was the MP representing a political party, yes, but also representing the mill owners. And it was thought that his cousin, the former MP when he resigned, Jonathan Joseph Richardson, might run again. But another mill owning company, the Barbers of Hildon, the Barbers Threads, put forward their candidate, and the Richardson family steps aside with some ill grace. And they put forward John Docherty Barber, who stood for the Liberal Party, but really stood for the mill owners. He was a son of the head of the family at that time, William Barber. And the Tory sources, namely the Belfast Newsletter, said that he was a radical Presbyterian textile manufacturer seeking to establish, and here's the phrase I want you to think about, the despotism of the mill. So here's the power struggle, the industrialists seeking to establish despotism. Say the Tory sources, says the Belfast Newsletter, who is very much in favour of the Conservative candidates who are representing the old landed gentry. So here's the change. Here's landed interests fighting, literally fighting, as we'll see, against industrial interests. The first candidate standing against Barber was Captain, well, he didn't stand. The first candidate who was going to stand against Barber was Captain Thomas Bateson. Later became Lord Durhamore, so he's obviously of the gentry. There he is with his fine hair and nice waistcoat. Formerly MP for County Londonderry, to become later MP for Devizes in Wiltshire in England. And a Belfast Newsletter who supported him predicted he would win, but he withdrew. And he said he withdrew because he had no support from the mill owners, hardly surprising, and he would not indulge in treating, that's basically bribery, and corrupt practices, unlike some others, as we will see, because this is a dirty fight. And Bateson withdraws and another candidate comes in, but only after a few weeks when there's no Conservative candidate. And he's Edward Wingfield Verner. And he's a rich, landed person. He has a house in Bray, in the posh part near Dublin, as you know, and Eaton Square in London, which is posh. He's the son of Sir William Verner, the MP for County Armagh. And the newsletter says, quote, "Can you imagine the joy of every Barney and Pat in the green Emerald Isles," for which, of course, read nationalists, when they imagined Lisburn had deserted its Conservative banner. Verner was Protestant and Conservative, the right man in the right place for an old and loyal borough, says the Belfast Newsletter, forever pushing the Conservative line. And Verner stands against Barber. Barber wins. John Docherty Barber, standing for the Liberals and the mill owners, gets 140. Edward Wingfield Verner, standing for the Conservatives and the landed gentry, gets 134. No, very small electorate in those days. So property qualifications didn't apply very widely. Majority 6, turnout 274, total electorate 313. And the results immediately challenged by the Conservatives. This leads to an inquiry at Westminster in the Parliament. And the Belfast Newsletter says an election carried by kidnappers and bludgeon men, a bludgeon is a club, will not stand the test of parliamentary inquiry. Another commentator said Conservatives will keep up a constant heavy fire that shall not only silence every battery of the enemy, the Liberals, but shall blow up John Docherty Barber through the roof of St. Stephen's and scatter his ashes to the wind. So this is not gentle stuff. And allegations against John Docherty Barber in the February by-election. 5 Conservative electors were attacked by 28 named Liberal supporters. So we have 5 cases of people being attacked, 28 people named as their attackers. Samuel McConnell, who was a shuttle maker, turned on his lathe, presumably 1,000 bludgeons for Barber's blackguards to split the heads of Mr. Verner's friends. And he got £100 for his votes and his villainy. And £100 is several years' income for most people. So that's a lot of money. The bludgeons were taken before the magistrate. No action was taken against the bludgeon maker. The magistrate was J.J. Richardson, mill owner and former MP. Aha. We'll see what he does in other occasions. Catholics from Armagh and foundry workers in Belfast are brought in to staff the mobs which Barber allegedly employed. either 16 or 40 or some number in between were held at Barber's factory in Hildon. There's the relics of the factory there. So a bit later, of course. Subject to undue influence and treating with a view to inducing them to vote for Barber. One was so drunk at the election he couldn't vote. One, Samuel Corrie, tried to escape, was taken from Hildon to the polling booth and threatened that his minder would knock the eye out of him if he didn't vote Liberal. He actually didn't have a vote. Samuel Corrie could not vote, but his father could have voted, and his father was dead. So they expected Samuel to impersonate his father and vote anyway. And he didn't. And another man impersonating somebody else refused. And one person held at Hildon had fled there for fear of being kidnapped by the Conservatives, having turned down their bribes. Another one escaped, ran home, and his wife made him vote Conservative, so the records have it. And all this comes out in a parliamentary inquiry. And some at Hildon reported they were just there for the crack. And there is incomprehension in London as to what the word crack actually meant, which is something which carries on to this day. So we have a second by-election because Barber gives up. He says, okay, you've got me. There was bribery, there was corruption, there was violence. I'll stand down. Edward Wingfield Werner, again, stands. The first candidate for Liberals and the mill owners was Robert Barber, who was J.D. Barber's brother from the mill owning family, of course. He started to canvass before his brother's resignation, and he started to canvass as a Conservative. Even though his brother was a Liberal, even though he was standing against a Conservative, he started to canvass as a Conservative and then became a Liberal candidate. And this delighted the Belfast newsletter because it was obvious that Barber didn't know which party he supported. He was tainted by bribery allegations in the February election. It was to be tried for them as a case against the Barber brothers in 1864, which failed, but there was to be a case. And he would have to resign then anyway. And he withdrew on the morning of the election. And Jonathan Richardson, former mill-owning MP, stood for the Liberals. And he was really standing for the mill owners. He'd been a Conservative MP for Lisburn in the 1850s. He was now standing for the Liberals. But as always, he was standing for the mill owners. Two drunks voted for Barber anyway, but the result wasn't really in doubt. Wingfield Werner won, 151 votes. Jonathan Richardson got 90 votes for the Liberals. And Robert Barber has to be described as something, so he's called an independent Liberal. He gets for two drunks. Majority 61, turnout 243 out of 313. So it's all settled? Yes? No. It's not all settled. There's another inquiry. There's another. The election fails. The inquiry fails. And Edward Wingfield Werner is MP for a few years. So that's just a nice example of what industrialisation is doing to society in Ulster in the 1860s, in this case, with the industrial interests trying to seek power, gain power from the landed interests. And in the election, the industrialists were not shy in pointing out how many people they actually employed and how people would be, it would be sensible for these people. Hello, I've lost it. Oh, yes. Sensible for these people to vote for them anyway. And it was a dirty, dirty business. Belfast continues in its way of being the industrial city. Here's the same analysis 50 years on, 1890s. 20 makers of aerated water now. Agricultural implements 7, blocks and pumps, cambric chemicals, 76 linen makers, 7 rope and twine makers, still only 3 ship makers, shipbuilders, but my goodness, they're big by now. bleachers, brass founders, cotton spinners, distillers, flax spinners, iron founders, in addition to the brewers and people who made brushes and bellows and baskets. So there's still some making for the local market, but majority of people worked in what becomes the export trade. Where has it gone? Oh, you stopped doing it. Oh, we'll move on. And I was encouraged by my interest in the Belfast as an industrial city to write this book, which Kieran spoke kindly of. And the publishers very kindly, as you see from that very tall book back there, did me a very nice leather-bound copy of my book, which was just lovely. I didn't know it was going to happen. Only they called it Changing Belfast, 1750 to 1914. And I actually called it, as you can see from the top right there, Clanging Belfast. Oh, a shame they got it wrong. It's still a very nice thing to have. So clanging, and I said I like noises. Belfast was visited in 1842 by William Makepeace Thackeray for his Irish sketchbook. I recommend you read that. It's really charmingly written book. And he said when he got to Belfast, the docks and quays are busy with their craft and shipping upon the beautiful borders of the loch. The large red warehouses stretching along the shores with ships loading or unloading or building, hammers clanging. Here's my word, clanging. Pitch pots flaming and boiling. Lewis MacNeice in his poem Carrickfergus said, I was born in Belfast between the mountain and the gantries, to the hooting of lost sirens and the clang of the trams. And there's a picture on the bottom right of the thunderous hammering and clanging of steel, a triumph of construction, and that's taken from the Titanic building. And Belfast was proud of what it did. And I love this poem by Raymond Calvert, which I'm going to read out, the Ballad of William Bloat. Pride. In a mean abode on the Shankill Road lived a man named William Bloat. He had a wife, the curse of his life, who continually got his goat. So one day at dawn, with a nightdress on, now, as you can tell, I was born and brought up in England. I've lived here 45 years now, and I don't naturally rhyme dawn with on, but say it in a Belfast accent. So one day at dawn, with a nightdress on, he cut her bloody throat. With the razor gash, he settled the hash. Oh, never was crime so quick. But the drip, drip, drip on the pillow slip of her lifeblood made him sick. And the pool of gore on the bedroom floor grew clotted cold and thick. Yet he was glad he'd done what he had, for when she lay there stiff and still, the sudden awe of the angry law struck his heart with an icy chill. So as to finish the fun so well begun, he resolved himself to kill. He took the sheet from his wife's cold feet and twisted it into a rope, and he hanged himself on a pantry shelf. 'Twas an easy end, let's hope. In the face of death, with his latest breath, he solemnly cursed the Pope. He was, note from the Shankill Road. But strangest turn to the whole concern is only just beginning. He went to hell, but his wife got well, and she's still alive and sinning. For the razor blade was German made, but the sheet was Belfast linen. So, high quality, pride. You want to hang yourself? That's the thing. But, pride cometh before a fall. She was all right when she left here. Famous saying in Belfast about the Titanic. And there's an old drawing of the Titanic at its launch. There's the drawing, a photograph of the Titanic as found on the seabed. And there's memorializations everywhere. And I just taken, indulge me with a wee copy there of the Titanic Memorial in Belfast City Hall Gardens. And one of the people who died in the Titanic was a shipyard worker called Mr. Roderick Chisholm, who was on the Titanic to finish off a few things which needed to be done. And I'm sitting in my, well, it's a spare bedroom, which is my study, looking out of this window. And Roderick Chisholm looked out of this window because he lived in my house. I think I'm touched by the fact that a Titanic man lived in my house and looked out of my window. It was his window then. Titanic is a symbolic thing, dreadful business. Lots of people died, and it's symbolic of a decline of the 20th century, which was going to happen to Ulster's pride, Ulster's industry. The sinking of the Titanic was a blow to confidence. Losses in the World War I, Great Depression following, World War I, World War II, losses there. Belfast was bombed, losses there. Brief post-war revival as people retooled. Then comes globalization. Competition for more innovative producers, such as in Japan. Competition from producers with one-time cheaper labor, such as Korea and China. And globalization does the old traditional manufacturers, as in Belfast and elsewhere, no favors. And there's unsuccessful strategy to try and counteract it, the focus on oil tankers in the shipyard, Harland and Wolff, which doesn't do them any favors. The brief focus on man-made fibers across Ulster, which was gone. The Lion saga, again symbolic of industrial decline. The 20th century has not been good to Ulster industry. And we changed from clanging to clinking. We changed from manufacture, noisy manufacture, to what can we do with what we used to have, to industrial heritage and tourism, to clinking, the clanging of people working, of metal banging against metal, to the clinking, symbolized the handing over, clinking of coins for admission into tourist centres. And we have the shipyard photograph taken in the 1980s, largely empty, as you can see. On that spot now, of course, we have the Titanic building, one of the most notable tourist facilities in the world, presumably hit by COVID, as so many other things have been hit. So clanging to clinking, from building things to seeing where things used to be built. Clanging, the shipyard workers all wearing their caps, coming out around about 1905, something like that. Clinking, tourists, locals who were invited to have a hat, to take a cycle ride, to come and join for the 100th anniversary of the Titanic at the spot where the ship had been made. So clanging to clinking, from manufacture to tourism to heritage. Clanging, the shipyard workers coming out, and that's around that 1910, 1911, something like that. Thousands of shipyard workers coming out. And on the Newtonards Road, just by Ulster's Freedom Corner, you have the shipyard workers commemorated in the statue of the three men there. Put up a few years now. And a brochure, a plaque looking at Titanic people, telling you something of the history of the Titanic. And the houses round about, not these, but the ones were there before, would have been inhabited by the shipyard workers. So we have a heritage. We don't have very much of the manufacturing left, although Harland and Wolff, of course, is still working. Clanging, or more clattering rather, and clanging in the linen mills, to clinking to the heritage. And there's a very nice picture of a statue to the mill worker, but in West Belfast by Ross Wilson. And Here's tourism. Titanic, the boat tour, expert commentary. Titanic and city tours, Belfast original sightseeing tour. Come and see where the Titanic was built. She was all right when she left here. And so we move from a focus on manufacture to manufacturing still goes, quite a lot of manufacturing left. In Northern Ireland, some of it has struggled, of course. We've lost a good deal, especially in places like Ballymena. But there is still quite a lot of manufacturing, but it's not what it was in Belfast, and it's not what it was in Lisburn either. And we have in Lisburn the Irish Linen Centre and, of course, the Lisburn Museum. So that's me done. Thank you for listening. I will now stop sharing, and I hope there's somebody still there. Oh, there's me.
That's wonderful. Thanks very much, Professor Royle. That was a sweeping overview of industrial East Ulster. In the chat here, we have a few questions that have come in over the last minute or two, and I would encourage anyone else to send some questions in. Can I ask you a few questions just before we start?
Yeah.
And this is because these talks are roughly themed on the centenary of Northern Ireland, and we just launched an exhibition, just our first bricks and mortar exhibition in 16 months this week on the centenary. And just to put you on the spot, as I have done many of the presenters, so what objects from our industrial past, if you had to choose one or two, would you put in a display to encapsulate something of the last 100 or so years?
Can I have a Titanic?
Yeah.
I think you could have something from the linen industry, a shuttle or something. If I only have something small, I'd have a shuttle from the linen industry. You've probably got them in the linen museum.
We have a few, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that would be good.
Well, one of the things, sorry to interrupt, we do have a display. I noticed you mentioned man-made fabrics there as some material relating to LARA, the Linen Industry Research Association, which was a very 20th century way to boost the linen industry. It was a research association based at Lambeg, and they first looked at linen, trying to make the industry more efficient. And then throughout the 1960s, they sort of changed focus and they moved towards man-made fabrics, which you mentioned.
Yes. But that's gone. It's rather sad.
Yeah. So Jim Hamilton, he's put a question to you. He says, you've mentioned industrialisation of Belfast in the early 19th century. Was there any organised resistance to this, as there was in England through the activities of the Luddites?
Yeah, well, yes, there was. I gave the example of the sawyers who protested mightily against that. Yes, so there was. I don't know how well organised it was, but there were certainly people and organisations, groups of people who thought that the way of life was going to change, and the way of life, of course, did change. And it's hard still. You still see the same sorts of things to counteract a more efficient way of doing things, and efficient means more cost effective. And people who worked and lived in and from the old industry, they lose out.
Okay. And there's two related questions here. During industrialisation, what jobs were available to women? And the same person's asked, were linen weavers mostly men, women, or a combination?
Well, the jobs available to women, there were domestic service jobs, of course, and jobs in, some would work in agriculture, some would work in retailing, but Belfast and the other places were known for providing jobs for women in the linen factories. Inside the factories, there was some gender-specific tasks. Heavier tasks tended to be done by the men, but managing the machines, managing spinning and weaving machines rather was largely a work done by women. And this goes back, as I mentioned William Makepeace Thackeray's Irish sketchbook. He has some nice little drawings which he did himself in the Irish sketchbook, and one of them is of a woman, a Belfast woman, working in the linen industry. So it goes way back, and so it was largely women, and this was really helpful in a way, although they had hard lives and there was a lot of occupational illnesses. But it often meant, even usually meant, the working class households would have a man who could often worked in shipbuilding or engineering or chemicals, particularly in Belfast, and a woman who could work and did work, and wives, daughters could work in the linen industry. So there was 2, perhaps children working, 3, 4 incomes coming into the household. This made Belfast, it was a place of great trouble in the 19th century. Of course, we know this, but it was actually, relatively speaking, wealthy. And you could see that in terms of the housing. You might look back at Belfast housing in the 19th century and say, oh dear, that wasn't very good, but it was a heck of a sight better than Nottingham or Salford or places across the water where they had back-to-back, or Leeds, fine example, back-to-back houses where you had a neighbour on your left, a neighbour on your right, and a neighbour behind you. You had sort of half the house, so it's called back-to-back. No back-to-backs in Belfast, and Belfast houses were terraced houses, sure, but they were relatively good, because there was a certain amount of income available, more than in most industrial cities, because there were jobs, plenty of jobs available for women.
Okay, there's a question for John McCaffrey, excuse me, and it's the type of question you love to ask a geographer. Why did Dublin not industrialise in the same way as Belfast?
Dublin had important industries, but tended to be food and drink. Guinness was terribly important, and Jacob's biscuits was a huge industry in Dublin. I read something about 20 hours. It was all to do with the character, of course, of the northerner versus the southerner. The northerner was hardworking, the southerner was a lazy lump. But this was obviously politically biased. There's a certain amount to be laid at the door of people like Harland and Wolff, who had personal qualities. Harland was a great mover and shaker, and he is responsible for a lot of what goes on in terms of turning Belfast into a major shipbuilding company. So it's personal factors to some extent. Maybe there's something in the politically biased factors saying, oh, different types of character. And Belfast, I suppose, it feeds off itself. Once it gets going more, and it brings in a lot of people from across the water and further afield to work in these industries. So Belfast has a more cosmopolitan feel to it than Dublin would have done at the time. I'm struggling a bit here, but character, I'm not going to go with character. Personal qualities, the cosmopolitan nature, the sort of self-generating impact of you get big, you become bigger. And Dublin focuses on food and drink, which is not the same.
Just on some of the mill owners, I was struck when I first read your paper on the 1863 by-elections that there was something about the wealthy industrial mill owners that were seeking a title, a space in Parliament, because it was an extra dimension to a further jump up the ladder. And there was a real struggle, from J.D. Barber to earn this place in Parliament. Yet his sons, the next generation, got these positions quite easily. John Millen Barber was elected to the Northern Ireland Parliament and served there until
Yeah.
1951. He held almost every civic position that you could have. Almost, I think they say that he had an obsessive desire for these positions. I'm just interested if you could talk about that a wee bit.
Well, they won, I suppose. The struggle has taken place by that time. The struggle was taking place in the 1860s, and although it wasn't initially successful because J.D. Barber was thrown out, the dam has been breached. The despotism of the mill, as Belfast Newsletter had it, is a thing. And the mill owners are in a terribly powerful position because they do control the lives and income, the work, everything of so many people, especially in a place like Lisburn. I think there's something like 1,400 people worked for the Richardsons in the 1860s. That's in a town of a few thousand people. That's absolutely huge. And once you get going, once you become, I suppose, it never happened to me, of course, once you become important politically in that way, then that's just dynastic. You looked at the Conservative MPs at the time, the Verners, he was the son of the MP for Armagh. When his father died, he ditches Lisburn and takes over as Armagh. So I think there's a dynastic thing which goes along with their expectations. And the Barbers, sure, they had expectations, and didn't they become important and remain important?
Yeah.
When are they going to do something about that mill?
Yeah, well, people are just on that point. Like, obviously, people in Lisburn are very fond of the mill and the legacy of the Barber family. We have another question here about child labour in the late 19th century, about children working in the mills. I don't know if you want to talk about it. That little bit's one of the darker aspects.
Absolutely. I've forgotten his name momentarily. There's a man, Malcolm, who writes about the mills, in the occupational hazards of the mills.
Andrew Malcolm, I think.
Yes, that's it, Andrew Malcolm, in the mid-19th century. And it's just awful. And some inquiries I've read talk about boys. Boys in particular had a particular job of fetching stuff out of machines when the stuff was being thrashed. And they get their arms caught in the machine. Quite often, not more than once, one person presumably. And one phrase which stuck in my mind, I think it's in an inquiry led by Malcolm, is boys will be boys. Yeah. They were playing about. Boys will be boys. Oh dear, his arm's shredded, but boys will be boys. And it was just the sheer lack of care, the lack of duty of care is just astonishing. Now, things get better. Of course they do, not least because people make a fuss about it. But occupational hazards were awful for the boys and the girls. The women a lot of them used to work in bare feet. Their feet would get wet, they'd get problems with their feet. Thackeray's woman in the Irish sketchbook has bare feet, and they would get problems with that. They get problems from breathing in the dust. So if you had lung diseases, it was a difficult enough thing. And working in the shipyards, of course, was also awful. Throwing red hot rivets about, and lots of people died. It was a very different period, and we look back with our views of how things ought to be, quite rightly how they ought to be. People should not die at work. And you look back at what it was, and boys will be boys. How dreadful was that?
There's a tension between, a degree of pride of producing something like the Titanic, but then the awful fact that men died in its production
Yeah.
and in its sailing, I suppose. But um,
Yes, men fell off the gantries. It's
yeah.
not uncommon at all.
So Sarah Johnson has sent in an interesting question. She says, would you please mention a bit about early 19th century dry goods from Belfast? I'm researching A.T. Stewart, who hailed from Lisburn and bought his first stock from Belfast in the early 1920s.
Early 1920s.
Oh, 1820, excuse me.
Right. Well, goods would be brought to the towns by travelling salesmen. So that was the way in which these things were often distributed. Some of the towns, the larger towns, would have, even then, would have shops where stuff was sold. But a lot of the dry goods were manufactured. I don't know, clothing, if that counts as a dry good, were manufactured locally. People would have a dressmaker. Even people who didn't have that much money would have dresses made, dresses altered, trousers made, boots made. It was something people didn't, and these sorts of occupations were done, could be done in people's houses. It was a way of making money living in your own house. And it'd be only over time with industrialization, with capitalism coming in, did factories start to do things which people had done in homes. Now, I know that's not a great answer. It's not a topic on which I have any great expertise, but I could just observe that changes took place, and from the early part of the 19th century onwards.
Yeah, my understanding is A.T. Stewart, he was using some of his capital to buy muslin and linen goods, and he brought them over to the States and then started selling it. Sort of used that as his competitive advantage, the fact that he had
right, yeah,
that information or access to goods and stuff. And we see the outworkings of it in the 1860s when he's helping local weavers out. He sort of repays the favor. They help him, he helps them. But
well, the 1860s was a really difficult time because of the embargo on cotton being brought across from the American South, the blockade of the American South in the Civil War, and there's a real poverty. So anybody who's helping in the 1860s was doing a good job. One of the reasons why there was such a lot of treating going on, why people were open for bribery in the 1863 elections, was that even the people who had enough property to have a vote, they were suffering because the times are very hard because of the American blockade of the American cotton famine. I started off my research career a long time ago now in Leicester when I studied for part of my PhD a town called Hinckley in the 19th century, which is a textile town. And things were just awful in the 1860s. Was a poem I will not give you, but I have it memorized, about how bad things were, and anybody who's got a way around this was helping.
Just on A.T. Stewart, I don't know if Sarah's interested. We do have we have a couple of items relating to him, but we have a begging letter. I think it's from the 1860s on display in the museum at the moment. It's somebody writing to him from Lisburn saying, I'm of good character. I've just had a couple of bad years. Could you possibly send me some money? And it's really nice wee letter. It's brilliant. So you've been really generous with your time here, and I just have one last question, and it's from the museum manager, Paul Allison, actually, who is delighted that I think you're previously a lecturer to him in Queen's Geography, like you were to me, and he's geographers over here. So as part of the display, we have a message to 2121. It's relating to the centenary. What piece of advice, wisdom, comment, argument would you send forth to 2121 for future curators to unpack and reveal 100 years from now?
Would this have to relate to industry?
It could do, it could relate to your own personal thoughts too. We're trying to ask, we're trying not to be too prescriptive.
Well, the thing that is attacking us at the moment, of course, is COVID, which I think is going to be changing the way in which we work in the future. And I would like them to think about, it will be interesting to know how it all happened. I mean, I'm sitting in my study in the room where the man who drowned in the Titanic looked out of this window. Pre-COVID, I would have been in a nice room, lots of people in front of me talking. Has the world changed? Is the world going to change? How has the world changed because of what's happened in 2020, 2021? Please, not 2022. And that was something which would interest me. I think things are going to be different. I don't think things are going to, but I, as a geographer, I have been around the world. I have been to 92 countries. I do small islands. I've been to 908 different islands. Is anybody going to be able to do that again? Because conferences now, I've been to conferences in every continent. Are we going to do that ever again? Or are we going to have conferences? Me sitting in my room with the Ulster rugby flag behind me, like a Glentoran shirt on display behind the door there. Is this what life is going to be like? Has life become like this? Will it be like this forever now? This is what I want 100 years' time, people to say, hey, things changed in 2021 and how nice it must have been before. How's it going to be now?
Wow, that's fantastic. And it's a great thought to end on. So again, Steve, thanks very much for your time and expertise tonight. It was a real delight to listen to. Can I thank the Heritage Fund Shared History Fund for supporting the talks this evening. And if you visit lisburnmuseum.com, you can see the lineup for the next couple of talks, which are starting again in September. We have Paula McFetridge. She's the Artistic Director of Caboss Theatre. She will be speaking on 100 Years of Northern Irish Arts. We also have the brilliant Fergal McGarry in October, and the discussion panel with BBC NI Stephen Watson in November. So if you visit our website, you can read more about that. I want to thank Stuart, who is the brains behind the operation, B&L Productions. He's been great at helping us do all the technical AV stuff. And tomorrow morning, we'll send you up an evaluation email. And if you could let us know your thoughts, anything we could improve on, anything you'd like to see in future talks, in future sessions. So apart from that, thanks very much for your time, and we'll see you again in September. Thank you.